First of all, I'd like to thank you for inviting me here to present the Albanian pen, and also myself as a writer and translator. And otherwise, thank you for the presentation of my country. I was longing for it, and so I found it today. Thank you. I'll try to tell you a short picture of how are the human rights and freedoms in Albania. But to understand that, we should see what Albania was during dictatorship, because it was a total isolation. But if the freedom does not exist, the society collapses in dictatorship and isolation. This very conditional statement of the rule, as in grammar, is the task of every state which is experiencing dictatorship. Albania was in a complete isolation for about half a century. Based on this, the Albanian state decided to be an open state after the 90s. The collapse of the freedom and human rights during the isolation have produced a society which is still seek to undertake the very challengeable task of building the democratic state and the open society. The collapse of the economy forced the newborn society to go towards the free market and trade. The collapse of the court, which was not independent, forced the newborn society to go through the task of building independent courts. The collapse of the freedom of expression made the society to undertake the building of the institution of independent media. The collapse of religion, as religion was forbidden in Albania, made the society to turn back to the institution of religions. Albania is the example of a country which produced hate amongst it and an interior war, and which was very wild amongst the citizens and its people. But let's try to focus in the number of people who are called victims of communism, because they were victims and political prisoners. The number of people and families sent to concentration camps remains for Albania a very bad example of a society which collapsed with the human rights chart. During dictatorship, politicians, writers, journalists, composers, actors, priests, and even peasants and farmers were sent to prison when they tried to challenge the dictatorship. During the dictatorship, Albania lost its traditional values and its historical culture. The Rost regime of all times acted and governed the country for about half a century. As I mentioned before, were all these facts that made Albania to choose to be an open state, but it also has still its weakness points. There are still problems with ex-political prisoners and families of the victims of communism. The social group in Albania is not still integrated in the economic and political life of the country. The ex-landowners, the social group is still not integrated, and the land and property confiscated by the law of dictatorship regime is not compensated nor in money value or not in physical area of land. If we try to stay a while to something which is still a high risk collapsing the human rights in Albania, is the Kanun. The Kanun, which was an old constitution of Albania for about 500 years, it's not now the constitution of Albania, it's not a written law, but a kind of law which takes place in very rough, tough areas which are in the north of Albania. And this Kanun seems to lead and to govern the life of many people and families in some regions. The freedom of expression in media and press seems to have still problems, and sometimes it collapses. The system of welfare system still seems to have problems for the integration of the social groups who need the aid and the assistance of the state and institutions to guarantee their everyday life standards. The corruption which is still operating in public institutions and officials who are corrupted. The risk of monopols in economy. The new buildings and houses are not still registered, and so the people are not yet the owners of their own properties. The urban system and the non-criterion buildings in villages and towns and in the capital of Albania is still a weak point. At least, but not the last, the weakness of the independent courts with professional lawyers, which should be the base for the creation of the state of justice for all citizens. Albania also needs to perform more to build an open society and an open and democratic state. But if we try to see these points one after another, we may focus in some which are more, to my opinion, are more important, the most important. Ex-political prisoners and families of the victims of communism. The social group is not integrated and not compensated in any money value, and this group finds it difficult to arrive and fulfill the targets of everyday life. The social group is not involved in the economical and political life of the country. The Albanian state and parliament are still amongst the governments and political class, people from the old guard of communism and dictatorship regime with a very bad past who are unable to prescribe a moral compensation for the families of persecuted and executed Albanians during dictatorship. People strongly connected in services with the secret police of Albania during isolation are now deputies of the Albanian parliament, and they are also working in the high administration of the state. If we refer to the ex-landowners, this seems to be a real challenge in the economic life of the country. The law of the land reform during the communism took and confiscated the property of many big families and big landowners. After the 90s, Albania undertook another reform for the land based in the law number 7501, this article, and this article has caused many deaths and also many hatreds, and many families are in a blood revenge because of this article. I'll tell you about this later on. The landowners before 1945 were not refunded any land and were not compensated any land in its physical status or with any money value. This makes the investors not to be clear to invest money in the Albanian economy. But this is just one side of the problem. The next side is very problematic because of this non-justice law. This article number 7501, many families in the north of Albania are in hates and in blood revenge with each other. If we take under consideration the sources given by the organizations which take care of this problem, the number of people and families in these situations goes to thousands. This is also one of the most important reasons why Kanun takes place in the life of people in some regions of the north and in some suburban areas of Tirana. The Kanun. How can we talk about the freedom and human rights if many people and families in some regions of Albania live in a self-isolation? Why do they live in a self-isolation? It's not hard to say that, it's hard to challenge it. If a family has had a quarrel to another family or words about the land, about these borders, because this is my house and this next is yours, and this was my house and my land because it was of my grandparents, and because the law was not justice to the Albanians, this person and these people are killing each other. And so, mainly the boys. Boys can go out of their home, they can go to school, they can go have a social life, they can not have anything because they are threatened to be killed by the boys of the next family. And so this kind of death, of killing, never goes to the end. And so, as I told you, many children, mostly boys, cannot attend the school. They cannot have the right of education granted because their families are in this blood revenge with other families and they want to escape to the revenge. This article number 7501 of the land reform produced many victims in Albania, and so many Albanian citizens are not free at all. If we refer to the freedom of expression in media and press, Albania has a model of building now its independent media model. Because Albania is divided in three kinds of media model. One kind, which in my opinion is not responsible media, with an abuse with the freedom of expression, which informs the public with the news that do not last more than 3 days and they are not serious. Another kind of media, which is in service of the interested groups, politicians, or corrupted people who use the media as a tool in their hand to secure and guarantee their economic and political power. And also there is the third kind of media, which suffers from the lack and strips because it's performing the model of a serious and independent media. But this kind of media is already closing in Albania, and I will give you the example of a newspaper, which is the newspaper Tema, and this newspaper the board of this newspaper are producing the newspaper by their home because they do not have any more offices. They were closed in a very strange way. Also, there have been very high fees, or there were many manners to stop a television program which was in the top channel, because this top channel TV was declaring and was informing the audience with the reality of what I told you before. The Albanian citizens are not free at all as long as they do have to wait in long queues in the embassies of foreign countries. Albania has joined NATO, and as a society, Albania is very open towards the other states and other countries. Albania as a state played a very important, very wise role during the Kosovo War. Albania followed as a country a very careful foreign policy, and at this time Albania also sent its troops in those countries where democracy was collapsed in the meaning of human rights, on human rights. But Albanian people and citizens does have to wait long queues to receive a visa to visit their relatives who are now immigrants in many countries of Europe and all over the world. Albanian citizens do not have this right granted. Albanians can go without a visa, they come without a visa here in Turkey. They can go in Macedonia, in Montenegro, in Kosovo, and as I know, in Israel. And for other countries, Albania should have a visa, but not just a visa, but they should wait for about a month or 3 weeks in the embassies of different countries. As I asked your attention in those problems because I see that these are the most important problems which force the Albanian people not to be free and not to have their human rights granted. Albania of today, compared with the Albania of 20 years before, has done a great change. And also, it is challenging the situations, which to my thinking, but the society today, it's a product of isolation and dictatorship. This product is made in a very roster experiment that in my country than in other countries. But this 20 years of political and economical transition have taught to the Albanian society of the 21st century that the freedom and the rights can only be guaranteed if the society and the state put the standards of a democratic society, which means the state of justice for all citizens, independent courts, independent media, and an open and civic society. But according to that, the Albanian society and mostly different organizations taking care for human rights and writers and journalists from the civil society have taken care about. But politicians very rarely and very seldom they have paid attention towards the risk of the human rights as they have collapsed and which are collapsing in the eyes of the public every day. And this may be, put the standard of another thing which will make the society to arrive the limits of a criminalized society. But as the world today faces the crisis for oil, energy and food, and as human beings faces to those crises, Albanians have to grant and to see in another task granted the freedom and the rights, I mean human rights. In that way, if writers, journalists and people from the civic society are paying huge attention to that, I mean that politicians in Albania should think as statesmen and they should put an attention to those cases. So thank you.